And we are kicking off our podcast open season by bringing to the stage Hugo, former A55 and current TFTC founder. Today, we will be discussing one of the hottest subjects in the blockchain industry at the moment, the network state. Hugo, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. So do feel free to introduce yourself and welcome again.
Thanks, Ricardo, for inviting us and for being such an enthusiastic person about the topic.
Hugo, I would like to hear from you first because network stage is a topic that is quite complex, even when you're talking about a global concept. Usually, people refer to network state to Balaji conception, but from your perspective, how do you see the network state playing a role in the next few years?
Well, I think the network state will be a very crucial topic in the next few years because we've been pursuing our track with existing institutions that are very old, that are coming from the 19th century, sometimes even from the 18th century, that are really tied to land and that are becoming and that are coming initially from the Westphalia Treaty, that are land first and governed by maps, printers, and guns. So at the internet era, and to the extent that with the new mobilities and the existing economic system that is delivering every time less benefits and utilities at an every time higher price, and with the modern contingencies with local challenges and global challenges, I think that a new civic and economic system has to be crafted. So that's why I believe that this network state approach that connects people in a complementary way than just the zip code will become increasingly crucial.
It is interesting to also think because once again, Balaji is such a prominent voice when it comes to the network state. He released a book on it, but it's also good to reflect on our own personal views on network state, because we are talking about the bigger network state, which would probably comprehend the whole globe, but we can also think about the smaller network states in the plural. So how do you see this different? Yeah.
So I think that Balaji offers a very specific view about the network state. He's been very vocal about the concept, and he's been promoting it a lot, which is great for the industry. But he gives a very specific and very personal view on what the network state should be. So it's a very American view, and it's a very Silicon Valley and software engineering based approach to the network state. So I think that it doesn't necessarily apply to the entire world. I think that the definition of a network state, which is like run a community almost as if it would be a startup, like the coolest thing in Silicon Valley, but just build your next startup quite differently, more than a political angle, and create a network that could create at some point some sovereignty. But for the rest, just follow your software track and startup track. And with this, you could possibly build a network nation run by a network state. I think it's very interesting. It echoes a lot, I think, the direct audience and the industry. But the world is not Silicon Valley. The world is not even the US. And the people on the web are not all engineers. So what happened in Web 2 is a huge democratization of accesses. So many times, even if we look at the global south, or even if you look at South America, for instance, or Brazil, a grandmother is absolutely able to access a mobile phone and to transact and to access social media, but she doesn't know a thing about software. So I think there's an interesting next step to be done, which is how to make it more affordable, more accessible, and more fit for the world, for a world of 8 billion people, for a world that is mostly populated of Chinese people and Indian people and Nigerian people and Indonesian people and Brazilian people that are all also connected to the internet, but that are coming from a very different background than capitalist, big tech, Silicon Valley, but that still drive GDP, still drive culture, still drive economies, and that are even more damaged by the institution that they onboarded from Westphalia. So I think that what is crucial and what we are working very hard on is how to create a model that actually works for the world. And to work for the world, it needs to work above all for the once known global south. So just the world the way it is today, which is in countries such as China, India, Brazil, Nigeria, South Africa, and obviously that could also work for the US. And that could also work for local communities, but that could work for global cooperation. So that's where hopefully we can complement Balaji's views and complement a North American view with an actual global South and ascending market view.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. When it comes to the network state, we had this preeminence of the North American or American view, but at the same time, when we're thinking about network, we should be thinking globally, not only let's say economically, but socially and culturally. In that sense, the global South plays a huge role, and we can probably focus on your experience with A55 because, as far as I remember, A55 is an investment firm focused on new economies. So if you want to take over on that, that would be amazing.
Yeah, so that was my last experience as an operator, still part of the venture as a shareholder. And I built it back in 2018 as the first new economy investor and new economy lender based on digital data and digital revenue to fund entrepreneurs in a complementary way than venture capital. So it was initially born as venture debt, and then SaaS finance, and then upfronting digital revenue. And after COVID, it just became a SME lending based on digital tooling, because with COVID, every single company became a tech company and not only a software company. So this took me into the web industry, then so Web 2, then Web 3, and really took me into helping entrepreneurs in any possible way with capital, and then at a personal level with more training. So I've been also a very active mentor and angel investor. And now, as I was getting deeper and deeper into the components that could really unlock prosperity and create more access and wealth for our societies in South America and Latin America and beyond in emerging markets, I got to the conclusion that the main leverage wasn't just money and even less principal plus interest, but that was actually the civics, and that we had to fix the civics and to fix governance to create a massive leverage effect to channel opportunities that would obviously include capital, but that would include much more than this. That would actually include access to an array of public utilities. And for this, we needed to fix the very social contract and adjust the very civics. And this is why we are here now with a group of people working together on tools for the commons.
That was amazing because as you were speaking, I was already thinking on asking you what brought you to TFTC, because I think the same way. I see finance is just a first step, and one thing that I learned in the blockchain industry and even decentralized finance is governance is still, let's say, a huge pain point that we have to work on, and that's where TFTC, Tools for the Commons, comes in. So if you want to go over a little bit on Tools for the Commons and explain your view for it in the next few years? Where do you want to reach, or what do you want to accomplish with the FTC? That would be quite interesting to hear from you.
Sure. So the big vision is to create a decentralized and distributed network where many builders all around the world contribute to a peer-to-peer network to organized public goods. So it means that in the same way that Bitcoin recreated in a peer-to-peer way, a peer-to-peer cash system that is stateless, so splitting money from the state, we want to split public utilities and public goods governance from the state, which means that we want people to be able to self-organize their values and to recreate cooperation arrangements and to organize mostly their shared resources. That includes the tangible ones, such as actual physical utilities, actual physical infrastructure, but that also incorporates the intangible ones, such as culture and money and values, for instance, and to be able to organize them into a completely new kind of social contract that would be peer-to-peer based, so not intermediated by states or politicians, but that could be registered in a direct network. And we want to merge all those concepts into what we call the fourth sector, which is a hybrid of the state, the market, the not-for-profit sector, and peer-to-peer protocols. So in some extent, it's sort of a world coin for organizations, where any kind of organization would be a single unit of collaboration that would be absolutely interoperable with existing components. So it means that the value we deliver is to dissociate access to public goods to the zip code, because now it's an absolute random mechanism. It depends on where you were born mostly, that will define your passport, and your passport will define which kind of public utilities you can have, which are the utilities that your government can provide you. So can you open a company, yes or no? Which kind of money can you transact? Is it a restricted money? Yes or no? Are you having access to public schooling? Yes or not? Of quality? Yes or not? Do you have access to health, transportation? Yes or not? How free are you with your passport? Can you freely cross borders? Yes or not? And this is the major determinant of whether you can access life and abundance and even freedom. And it's completely tied to zip code. So at the edge of the internet, we believe that it's completely unfair, and it prevents us from collaboration. So we are trapped in a social contract that we are forced to sign. And that's what we want to fix, to be able to create local institutions that could be recognized globally through the network, but also create global cooperation mechanisms. So think about the United Network Nations, for instance, instead of just the United Nations, to address problems such as climate, such as migrations, such as universal basic income, for instance. So we are building this framework. That's the long-term view. And for this, we'll do it step by step. So our first step into it is to build digital economic zones, mostly in the global south, to be able to have a neutral internet-first environment where people can organize their values and social contracts and private and public utilities, irrespective of the zip code, to have an extra passport that is diplomatically recognized, and then build a few extra applications on top of this that can include embedded finance, that can include decentralized finance, and that can also include DePIN, so decentralized physical infrastructure networks.
Oh, that's amazing, Hugo. It is also very interesting to hear from you because, well, you're a Frenchman living in Latin America. I'm a Brazilian man, have lived in Europe as well. So I believe we kind of connect when it comes to a globalized vision of the public goods. I completely agree with you. But I'd also like to hear from you when it comes to commons, because this is part of the brand as well. Tools for the commons. What exactly is the commons, and what exactly do you mean by managing public goods? Do they relate to each other?
Yes, for sure, they do relate to each other. So the commons are shared resources. Again, they can be tangible or intangible. They can be limited or unlimited. But these are the resources that we share in common and that are non-rivalrous and non-exclusive by nature. So if you consume one, you could either make those resources more abundant because you contributed to it or consumed it, or you could make them more scarce. So it means that the action of some people into those resources could either create an even higher abundance of those resources or an extra scarcity. And this is why they have to be managed in common. And I think that the market and the state at the same time, they've been terrible institutions to manage the commons because they've been extremely extractive to this. They've been managing them either as a monopolistic approach to it with the governments mostly that had and still have a monopoly on public goods, but it's a very weird monopoly because it's a monopoly out of a specific zip code and for a very specific nation. So depending on where you were born and depending on the zip code, this is the exclusive mandate of this centralized operating system that is monopolistic on those resources and that is not designed at all to share them either with smaller communities or bigger communities than a nation state. And then comes, and also based on an extractive nature of this, so really based the mandate that is for people that are nationals. And then there's the market, and the market mostly since post-Bretton Woods, but also with the existing accounting standard, which is of two dimensions, which is just debit and credit with two counterparties, which is by nature a delivery versus payment, where the delivery is a public good. So most deliveries are public goods. Very few deliveries are non-public goods. I can only think about some consumer goods, for instance. And a specific delivery that extracts the good, public good from one entity to another entity or to another person against a payment, which is a piece of paper or some unit of counts in a digital Web2 layer that are exclusively collateralized by fear and the atomic bomb and the derivatives of Pax America. I think this is just not a good way to share resources, either scarce or abundant, because it doesn't take into account the derivatives. So do you magnify the public good as you operate it, or do you put it more scarce? I think this should be integrated within accounting systems. And second is the very payment aspect to it. So it's for instance, depending on the currency and in the inflation of this currency, it can be completely unfair. It's not backed by the utility it provides. It's backed by the unit of counts that can be transferred to acquire this delivery. So this is why the existing institutions, in our view, are not fit to manage the commons, and that we need to manage them in a different way. And new technologies, and mostly peer-to-peer technologies, such as blockchain, can be a very interesting framework to manage them, to capture the externalities, and B, to be able to organize them on a peer-to-peer basis without unnecessary intermediation.
Yeah, I'm fully aligned with that with you. Let's just go back a little bit and think about when we were talking about the network state, and we can probably split it up in network nation, as you mentioned. I would also include network cities, and more importantly, the network societies. I believe everything begins at the network society level. So if you want to explore that specific topic and let the audience know, what does it mean is network societies? Are they like startup societies, or are they completely different?
So a startup society is a society that is following the same playbook of a startup company. So what does a startup company does? It starts small, it does some trial and error. And with the trial and error, it can either fail and shut down, or pivot, or double down on what works well, which is something that usually governments don't do because they are really afraid of making mistakes, and they don't have a testing and reward mechanism that incentivizes fast testing and fast victories and fast failures. So this is what a startup society means: is to manage a society such as a startup with a very fast testing, trial and error mechanism. Then when we discuss network societies, these are societies that are not organized predominantly based on their zip code, but that are organized based on their consensus. And their consensus form the links and the bonds of the people, and they need to be attached to a specific social and or moral contract to be tied together and to sign a social smart contract, or a social digital contract that embeds duties and rights. And as a network society, they will organize their values together. So they need to be consensual. They need to develop a capacity for collective action, so to create some rituals. They need to be able to share resources and to pool resources together. And possibly, and this is where they potentially become cities or even states or countries, it's the ability to crowdfund physical territories and finally potentially gain diplomatic recognitions. And this is the moment where they switch from a network society to an actually network city, or even network state or network country. So if we think about it, Bitcoin or Ethereum are already network societies. Facebook is somehow a network society, or at least it has the ability to connect people, but in a centralized manner. So yeah, network societies are necessary to build network states because they build very strong assumptions of what is necessary to build a network state.
Yeah, I always try to convey the simplest message for who is listening. The way I see it when it comes to network societies is something between the startup societies, but also the online communities. As you mentioned, social media platforms, they are already some sort of network societies in a centralized way, but the same applies for Bitcoin and Ethereum. Um, I think an important point to mention is the creation of the digital native institutions. We have been moving fast forward since the rise of the Web 2 that no one was ever talking about until Gavin Wood. But it's fact that we, like, from Web 2, we start like relating to each other in a different way than in the past. Now I feel like every platform, every social media is also some sort of their own community. Like, of course, sometimes it may happen that in between platforms you have the same user base, same community, but it's becoming quite normal that the person that use X, the person that use Meta are completely different. They have different cultures as well. So if you want to touch on that point specifically about the digital native institution, would be amazing.
Yeah, so digital native institutions are institutions that are predominantly digital by nature. So they organize some aspects of our life. It can be either finance or the civics or media or communication, and that they are organized in a network first way or digital first way. And then because it's because social networks are quite powerful when you have either very strong antagonisms or very strong consensus. This is what creates typically addiction, and this is what creates dialogue, either harmonious or violent dialogue. Typically, those platforms, they cluster as much as possible people, either based on their consensus or antagonism. So this is what we see a lot, because this is what gives clicks and this is what gives engagement, because you either love something or hate something. And this is how they've been organizing groups of people in a network way. So social media is very interesting. This is true that the market is getting more and more fragmented. So some platforms are mostly designed for business. If you think about LinkedIn, some platforms are mostly designed for personal life. If you think about TikTok for short moments, some platforms are also in between personal and professional. If you think about Instagram, for instance, some platforms are more liberal and uncensored by nature, supposedly, at least, if you think about X Twitter. So yeah, there's this clusterization mechanism. I think that decentralized media will be an interesting trend to follow, to have different ways to group, engage, and run or not run at all algorithms. But definitely social networks are nowadays the biggest digital native institutions. They are centralized, they are organized by market players, and I'm eager to see the evolution of them that could be really not company-based digital native institutions or company-managed digital native institutions, but network-managed digital native institutions, and that's the path forward that we are making.
Yeah, completely agree too. But when it comes to the digital native institutions, what I see lacking is still is the governance. It all comes back to the governance. Even though if you think about X, I think the past week we had a discussion internally when it comes to the own like X community. I'm feeling like now the user base is getting to a say: should we introduce this feature or not? Elon Musk has come with an idea of just hiding the likes and the comments, and the community like instantly come, no, don't do that. And he was like, okay, I will probably reconsider. That might not be the, let's say, the most efficient way to get her like inside, but I believe it's a start. We should first start with the culture and then move into the actual infrastructure able to for us to operate in that sense. So because now we have Pulse in X, but I'm not sure how far are the business when it comes to private blockchain. I know a lot of big techs are already working with private blockchain. Meta, Facebook had their own project when it comes to their coin. It didn't move forward. But are you like, how do you see these big techs introducing blockchain? Sometimes I feel like they're not sharing everything they're doing. I think that's just like normal when it comes to strategy. But I do see some movements. They're like moving towards like, let's say, even if it's not Web3, at least Web 2.5. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think it's quite natural, because those big platforms, they've been surfing the internet, but it was a very specific internet. It was a centralized capital markets based internet. And obviously they need to be very aware of the new trends. So if we think about blockchain or the Web3, they have to have a close eye into that trend. Now, this internet embeds new ways of collaborating that are very different from what they've been used to in Silicon Valley. So I think they are looking at some specific applications. Blockchains don't have to be open and public. I think there can be very centralized applications. and they can be used to fix a very specific pain point. So I think one day we will just stop framing this as Web3 to just become the web or an evolution of the web. In the same way that when we open a mobile phone or a web app, we don't say that it's a Web 2, we just say that we are on the internet. So I think it would be just a normal internet, and some Web3 application would be embedded. So what we saw recently, so we saw Meta trying to reduce its and optimize its dev engineering costs, which are obviously quite high, with a supposedly open source policy of some of its developments. We saw, for instance, Amazon developing some corporate private blockchains as well. So I think it's a new technology. It's the same way we saw all companies, including SMEs, adopting in 2020 very fast ERPs and softwares and social media because it was necessary for survival. So here it's not necessarily an absolute contingency for survival, but it's a new tech that's there, and every single large corp, including the big four, big five tech companies, will likely use blockchain in the way that best serves their entity. But conceptually, they are centralized and they serve a shareholder maximization approach. So it's not public goods by nature, it's not open source by nature. So this is where I think they will reach the limits, probably more in civilization design and purpose design in the fourth sector, rather than just knowing whether they use Web3 or not.
Amazing. Hugo, we are heading to the end of the podcast episode. It was amazing to have you here. I would like to make a few more questions, but our time is running out, so I'll try to be as objective as I can. If you want to leave some considerations as well, feel free to. But I would just like to talk about. You don't have to extend too much on that. Just give you like a quick perspective on how, because we're talking about Web3 and blockchain all the time. But from my perspective, that's just not all. We're missing sometimes some conversations on AI, on IoT, on 5G, on satellites, and also, of course, on cloud systems. How do you see those technologies, let's say, operating with each other?
They're absolutely crucial. Actually, these are the technologies of the network states, not crypto. I think cryptocurrencies, the Web3 technology of finance, to me, deep in is the technology of the network state. Because if you want to crowdfund physical territories tied to a social smart contract and with diplomatic recognition, the answer here is deep in decentralized physical infrastructure network. So the physical world needs to be legally and technologically tied to those new social arrangements that are peer-to-peer first, software first, and cryptographically organized. So this is why and where IoT and networked connected IoT and peer-to-peer networked connected IoT comes in. This is where distributed energy comes in. This is where distributed cloud and computing power and network access comes in. This is also where land and real estate tokenization connected to a social smart contract comes in as well. So all this is the absolute physical territory connector. And on top of this, some interesting applications such as AI would run and be the and run the application layer on top of this infrastructure. So this is where we are focusing a big part of our work.
Yeah, I believe that we're seeing right now, it's a complete revolution on the industry as well. But there's a lot of like silent moves that not everyone is paying attention, and I believe those are quite, let's say, attentive, are being able to see how all these things connect with each other. Okay, Hugo. So we end the podcast here today with your participation. It was amazing to have you here. I would like to thank you, and of course, invite you for a next episode. There's a lot of things to talk about. This was just the beginning, but I believe the people will leave with a sense of understanding as well of what Tools for the Commons is doing in a bigger sense. If you want to just leave your social media as well, I know you're more active on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn because when it comes to business, that's the main platform. I believe that will be probably, let's say, the headquarters of the intellectual minds when it comes to business and entrepreneurship globally. So yeah, if you want to leave any other social media as well, feel free to.
Yeah, you can reach me on LinkedIn. It's with my regular first name, surname, Hugo Mathecowitsch. And you can also reach out to me on X, where I'm also reasonably active. So it's at Mathecowitsch, capital H and capital M, and you can reach out to me on both networks.
Okay, perfect. Well, this is it, guys. Thank you so much for your audience, and I'll wait you on the next episode of Diffusion Podcast. See you.